Who gets better grades, males or females? So in this problem, we're looking at data that involves males and females GPAs, and the problem here asks us to use a 5% significance level and the p-value method to test the claim that there's a difference between the average GPAs of male and female students. So we're doing a hypothesis test because it says test the claim, and we want the p-value method to compare male and female students, male and female GPAs. Notice we have two sets of sample data here, right? So there's two samples, and we want to do a hypothesis test. Notice the sample sizes are both large, right? 61 females, 64 males. So what you're going to do this problem in the graphing calculator is you're going to hit start, or hit on, excuse me. Then you're going to hit the stat key. So after turning it on, hit the stat key. You're going to arrow over to where it says test. Now, we want a two-sample z-test in this instance. So we're going to take option 3, the two-sample z-test. The reason why we're choosing that is because we have large sample sizes and we have two samples involved in the problem. So we're going to use z-test and two-sample z-test at that. So we'll hit enter to select that, and it says data and stats. So we're going to come down here and enter our summary statistics. Remember here that we actually have the summary values. We do not have actual data. If we had actual data and you highlight that and hit enter, right? So what I did here to get that is I was over here in stats. I want to use stats. I hit enter to highlight that and get over to it. You see that in that list we have things like the standard deviations, the sample means, the sample sizes, etc. But if you're over in the data tab instead, if you hit enter and highlight that, when you do that, you have the standard deviations that they want you to enter, and then they have list 1, list 2. Now, the reason why they give you the standard deviations here is because this is a two-sample z-test option we've chosen, and the formal rule for choosing between z and t is that you use the sigma, the population sigma values, use the z-test, I should say, only when you know the population standard deviations or the population sigma values that are here. So they will not calculate it from the data and use the sample values as a substitute. However, in many cases, the professors just ask you to observe the sample size, and if it's large enough, so over 30 typically is what we consider large enough. If both of those are over 30, you can go ahead and use the z interval procedure. That's how I do it in my classes, for example, for my students. I allow them to use z as long as the sample size is large. So let's highlight stats again. We'll come down here and we'll put the sample standard deviations in place of these population values that they're asking for. So our standard deviation for the females is 0.32, so 0.32. And then for males, it's 0.34. Now you can see those numbers are in there already, and they're in there because I did some work in the previous video related to a confidence interval with the same data, and so the calculator is smart. It will transfer over values, so if you want to run a hypothesis test on it right afterwards, you can. All right, so now the sample mean in this case for females, and again, we're using population 1 as the females. That's how I entered in my standard deviation, so I'm going to continue to do that and be consistent. So the average GPA for females was 3.08, right? 3.08. And then the average GPA for males was 2.9, so we'll come down here and put 2.9 in for the X bar for males. Now, the sample size for females was 61, we entered that already, and the sample size for males was 64, so I'll type in 64. Then when you come down here, the next line asks us to choose the symbol that you would find in your alternative hypothesis. So normally I recommend if you're doing a hypothesis test with the calculator, you should still write down some information. In other words, you should still do part of the paper and pencil methods steps as you do this, because you want to make sure that you have this information for when you need it, right? So in this case, we want to know what the alternative hypothesis would be. Is it greater than, is it less than, or is it going to say not equal to? Let's see exactly what the claim says. It says to test the claim that there is a difference between the average GPAs. A difference means that they're not the same, but it doesn't say that one is bigger than the other specifically. It doesn't say, for example, males do better than females or females do better than males. It just says they're not the same, they're different. So we're basically saying they are not equal to in that case, right? That turns out to be that the claim is the same as HA, so we can infer that HA is not equal to. All right, and then at that point, hit enter for the calculate, and we end up with 3.05 as our test stat. We can see that at the top of the screen there. We also have a p-value that's provided, which is 0.002295, right? So basically 0.0023. That's your p-value. That p-value is small. It is less than 5%, and because it's less than the 5% that they gave us for the significant level, we would reject HO. And if we reject HO, we support HA. And HA, we said, is the claim in this particular problem because it says test the claim that there is a difference between the average GPAs. So it's saying not equal to, and that means that if we reject HO and support HA, we're supporting this claim. All right, so again, most of that needs to be written down on paper. So I want to just remind you that the steps that we used in the earlier videos are still important here that we did with paper and pencil method. The calculator only really gives you the test stat and the p-value. That may be helpful to you, but remember that's all it does, is it gives you the test stat and the p-value. It doesn't give you anything else. If you scroll down in the list here, you'll see that it just reports, the information you entered into the calculator. So basically the two things you get are the test stat and the p-value, which is basically, by the way that I did the problems, it's essentially like your fourth and your fifth steps of the problem. But you still have your first, second, and third, and your final sixth and seventh step that you have to do on your own. So the paper and pencil method is still important, except for the calculator in your hand, you can substitute out maybe perhaps two of the harder steps, the test stat and the critical value.